And welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 Review is all about the books that are read. And today I have my special guest, Safa Bernal.
Hello, hi, and welcome everybody to Book 101 Review. I am Safa Burnell. I am a Canadian cyberpunk and mythpunk author. I'm also a developmental editor for a small press and a poet. So it's a lot of fun to be here today. I cannot wait to have just another brilliant discussion and actually get to see Mr. Lucas in person. This is wonderful. Hi.
Hello, Miss Bernal. It's been a long time
Oh,
we're doing the
right?
audio.
Ah, it's wonderful. It's like, oh, hi.
Hi. Hi
Yeah.
you in person through this technology. So today,
I
Miss
love it.
Bernal, what we gonna talk about?
Today we're talking about science fantasy, and we're also talking about how some of my books might fit into that kind of genre. Science fantasy is basically a kind of light combination of science fiction and fantasy novels. It's a bit of a hybrid. It's usually where you find a lot of either combinations of magic with technology, or you've got world building that's a little bit softer than something like your Peter Watts hardcore hard sci-fi, and you're bringing in that little brush of, we don't necessarily need to know how it works, we just know it works, and it works
Yes.
amazingly. It usually contains some elements of the supernatural, and usually those elements of the supernatural are used to disregard some form of physical or natural law. So,
Yes.
teleportation, flight, things like that.
Yes, science fantasy novels involved also in blending of science fiction with fantasy, focusing on novels that merge technological advancements with magical elements,
Mhm.
speculative scientist discoveries, and a lot more. So, Miss Burnell, which science fantasy novels featured world of magic is from advanced technologies misunderstood?
Oh, I think, when I think of science fantasy novels, okay, I'm going to say a little bit of a hot take and then I'm going to smooth it over. Number one, I would say Dune, the Dune series by Frank Herbert. Those ones have this sort of mystic energy, this sort of magic to them, but there also seems to be this underlying scientific and chemical sort of presence that's going on uh, underneath that sort of mystic field. So I would definitely call Dune closer to science fantasy than I would call it science fiction or fantasy, especially with the space travel, and the weapons and different things like that. The next one that I would posit is more science fantasy, and this is going to be a little bit of a hot take, but Star Wars, you have high technology. You've got
Mm-hmm.
ships that go faster than light. You have different planets. You have translation machines. You have androids, robots. You've got starfighters. You've got all of this, but you also have the Force. And that sort of, and although, this like, oh yeah, but they're midichlorians, and midichlorians are actual things that you can test. So doesn't that make it scientific? The way that the Force is used in the canon of Star Wars really is more of a religious, more of a magic than it is a science. So I would posit that the entirety of Star Wars is science fantasy. Going back through the novels, through the Clone Wars novels, oh, how many novels have there been
Yeah,
in the
that's a lot.
legacy of Star Wars? I think that is a good kind of like, well, if you think about it, let's start with a big one, like a couple big ones,
Yes.
Dune and Star Wars, and then work our way down to like In the Shadow of the Throne. You've also got books like Red Moon by Kim Stanley Robinson and Gareth Powell's Embers of War. You could posit that Isaac Asimov's The Rings of Saturn, but some people call it just straight sci-fi. I've heard somebody trying to argue it's science fantasy, but I'm like, it's Asimov, it's sci-fi. Let's be honest. Like, let's be honest here.
Yes, let's be honest. May the force be with us. so,
Yes.
so, Miss Bernal, can you name science fantasy series where protagonists use both spells and space travels to navigate their adventures?
Oh, I think when I think of like specifically science fantasy, again, the first thing I would do is talk about um Star Wars. Star Wars is a big one. I think too, I would look at the fifth season, the series by that starts with the fifth season by N.K. Jemisin. I definitely like N.K. Jemison's work when it comes to her series with, the gods and everything like that, and this rise of science as it goes through it. Um, Robert Jordan's written quite a few, I know, which have a
Mm,
little bit of that sort of difference between science and magic when it comes to navigation. I mean, I was raised on, the old school TV shows too. So, you have, Earth Final Conflict. You've got oh, gosh, there on the spot. Just remember that TV show. It was only on for one season back in the 90s. So clearly I'm like, which one is it? It was oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to look that one up because my mind just went blank. I clearly have not had enough delicious coffee yet. Uh,
we need coffee in
I,
the morning.
oh yeah, oh yeah. And I mean, when you look at, there's the whole, you know, science advanced enough looks like magic. So you can get a lot of that kind of thrill. You have that in Dune with the navigators and the reason why spice is so important and the reason why they have to kind of chemically alter their brain in order to see where to go in the space lanes and how to navigate really well. And then you see what, the actual denizens of Arrakis do with such things. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see what they do with that in Dune 2, which is coming out, I believe, this year. Dune
Yes.
1 was an incredible tour de force in film. And I mean, Dune is one of those bedrocks of science fantasy in the entire world. I really do believe that. I think, if you go back far enough, you can see some elements of science fantasy even in the works of like George MacDonald back in the 1800s. And he, of course, was not thinking necessarily as science fantasy. He was thinking of purely fantasy, but there are scientific elements in some of his work, especially in Lilith, the novel Lilith, which he created, which was for adults, unlike The Princess and the Goblins, which was for kids. I
Yes.
also think of something like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, whom a lot of people call
Mm,
this science fiction and one of the first works of science fiction. I mean, we have an extant Roman era piece of literature that has a group of adventurers going on their ship and sailing to the moon and meeting the moon people and
yes.
having adventures there and going out to battle in the stars and being asked to stay as, nobility within these places, but eventually making their way home back to Rome, and that was in the third century AD, so we've got some science fantasy going on there because definitely with the science of the time, it was definitely science based with that fantasy element in there because you're going to the moon. Now, unless there was an incredible space program in the Roman Empire, of which I am not availed, I'm pretty sure that we can absolutely list that as science fantasy. And for me, that one was really fun to look into.
Definitely. Indeed. So, Miss Bernal, what science fantasy novels explores the ethical implication of blending human consciousness with the artificial intelligence through magical framework?
Ooh,
If
that
you,
one, I'm trying to think science fantasy and not just science fiction. And when we look at specifically at science fiction, the first thing I would look at is the Sprawl trilogy by William Gibson. And I would look at, how certain AI were created. In Neuromancer, we have the creation of AI based on a dead man that Case knew, and that AI continues to talk to him as if through the dead man's voice. And he leads Case through all of the ice, through all of the different hacks to get to the eventual AI that are at the center of, this storyline, through the center of Neuromancer, and then going forward, because you've got the Tessier Ashpool AI that are in there. And so I think that when I'm looking at this sort of combination between the sort of the human element and the machine, I start with William Gibson, mostly because I think that was my introduction to it. It's not that that's the first time it's ever happened, but he did it so well. He did it so well and so amazingly, where you've got Case, who is fully human. You've got his companion, who's kind of human-ish, but Case is very aware that this is just an artifice. It's not this person come back from the dead to guide him. This is just a sense of artificial. And then you go all the way into the AI, which you get this sense that maybe this isn't an AI, but maybe it is. How human is this AI? How do you go from there? I think, if I might be facetious,
Hmm. Voila.
this is my novel, Neon Leben. It is a work of cyberpunk. I do take a look at the nature of consciousness and the nature of sapience in the machine. And I do so with, I'm a comparative mythologist. I am somebody who has been deeply steeped into comparing the history of religion and religion all the way through, and how mystic traditions kind of combine in various areas of the world and various time periods. And so there is absolutely a sort of mystic tone to the way that I approach that binding of consciousness from human to machine, and that sort of transhumanist pull of uploading. Eventually, we're all going to upload into the cloud. Eventually, we're all going to, have artificial bodies and have this sort of immortality, to us. I find it very fascinating to look at that, not just as a scientific potential eventuality, but what will we gain? What will we lose if that takes place? I say if because I don't believe that everybody is going to upload to some form of cloud someday. I believe that it is only going to be a certain amount of people that do so. And whether or not people allow that kind of thing is on a little bit of shaky ground. So I have fun with that
Yes.
idea quite a bit.
Is this your best-selling novel, right? Neon
Yes.
Levin?
Yes.
Congratulations! But before we go on, Miss Burnell, yes, please show to them best-selling novel of Miss Safa Burnell.
And it is available everywhere.
Yes, everywhere worldwide. But before we go on, Miss Burnell, I want to shout out my ranking tops for the last 30 days according to pad status. Because in Cameroon, I got number 5 on the Apple chart, Bhutan at number 6, Jamaica at number 20, Cambodia at 31, Taiwan at 34, for Japan at 49, Malaysia at 66, Zambia at 91, Thailand at 109, South Africa 115, and a lot more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Miss Safa Burnell. So, Miss Burnell, which novel introduces a civilization that powers its futuristic technology through ancient or arcane energies?
Ooh, I'm going to go with the Prince of Thorns series.
Yes.
The Prince of Thorns series. I love that series. It was given to me by a former business partner of mine. And oh my gosh, Prince of Thorns, King of Thorns, and then Emperor of Thorns. Just incredible books that you think are pure fantasy at the beginning. You think there's nothing but fantasy within this, and magic and the way things work, and then all of a sudden you start seeing some places that the Prince of Thorns is going, and you start realizing, okay, there's a sickness going, there's this plague, this kind of sickness that goes in these certain areas, and then there's this search for technology, this search for this ancient weapon, and you don't really frame it as a post-apocalyptic world until about 3/4 of the way through Prince of Thorns, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, oh, oh my gosh, that's what it's radiation poisoning. It's
Mm-hmm.
this. Oh my goodness. So it is called the Broken Empire trilogy. And oh my gosh, such good books. Mark Lawrence did a fabulous job. I love how he takes first the prince and then the king and then going on to emperor through this sort of anti-hero, villain arc. I just love how he does that because I don't necessarily love the main character. I don't fall in love with York because he's a little bit of a bastard, if I might say that word. He's a little bit of a bastard, and he gets a little bit more, how shall I say, antagonistic as things go on. But I love it. I love getting into that rich psychology. And for me, what makes the Broken Empire trilogy really work when it comes to science fantasy, because I would qualify it as science fantasy just in my, like, you could just call it fantasy, but there is still that, like, oh hey, this is stuff from the civilization that was. I'm like, okay, so that's radiation poisoning, not a magical thing. So I'm gonna call it science fantasy for a minute, just for the purpose of today. Uh, um,
For the sake of our podcast.
yeah, for the sake of the podcast, let's talk about the Broken Empire trilogy. Mark Lawrence did a fabulous job. Loved it. But the thing that got me was how complex the characters were. And then we had the world building too. And so the world building was as complex as the characters. And I love that. I thrive on reading fiction where those characters are alive and brilliant and complicated, and they're not simple. They're not, just kind of something that they got from kind of list this trope, but it's this complicated kind of complex emotional life. And then you have really cool stuff. And
Yes.
throw in a dragon if you want, throw in a dragon which is really a space alien that's come down from the moon, throw in the secret weapon that they're trying to use to save the kingdom and have an expansionist war, throw in the fact that it's some form of vibrolance or some form of firearm or it's some form of other thing like that in a fantasy world. We see this in a very simplistic way with the Evil Dead series. Look at, this is my boomstick, and all of a sudden it's just like, holy gosh, it's magic. It's like, well, no, it's not. It's just a gun. But it appeared like magic because it was sufficiently advanced. And so I love it. I really liked that series. That one was a really good one to read. I think the more I think of on just specifically science fantasy, I think we have to kind of address a little bit that the trend in the last few years that I've been seeing, especially in new adult literature and kind of this literary space that's kind of brushing off from YA, going into new adult literature and then into just kind of trade and general population literature, is a blending of various things. So where science fantasy is a specific hybrid, there's a lot of blending science fiction and fantasy together until it's almost like you're like, well, where are you going to put this? And then the question is, well, I think you can put it both places. Okay, that's you
Fine.
get one shelf. What shelf are you going to put it on? Where are your people?
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure. So, Miss Bernal, in which science fantasy book does the discovery of magical artifact challenge the laws of physics as understood by the characters?
Okay. Let me think about that for a second. I'm trying to think.
Is it Star Trek?
Yeah. Well, so a magical artifact that changes physics.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot, I think. I'm just kind of, okay, so I'm putting my nerd hat on right now, but anything with Thor in it in Marvel Comics. So you've got characters like Thor in comics, you've got characters like Wonder Woman, even in DC Comics.
Yes.
She is technically, her power is magical because it comes from divinity. And so it means that, like, I remember when I was reading Kingdom Come, which if you are into comic books at all, even if you're not, even if you're just kind of like, oh yeah, well they might look cool, graphic novel every once in a while, read Kingdom Come.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of the best representations of what comics can be that I've ever seen in my life. It's just a fantastic graphic novel, and the artwork is insane.
Yes, definitely. Just like X-Men too, I
Yeah,
think. They are
yeah,
powerful in anime,
mhm,
something else that we cannot do in
yeah,
motion pictures. So, Miss
yeah.
Bernal, can you identify a science fantasy novel where the main character is a sorcerer and a scientist using both disciplines to solve a central conflict?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to think of which the best one is here. I've got Aether Ones. I think would be the first one that I would go to. Aether Ones by Wendy Coffin Porter. You know, you've got this kind of cosmic split between a realm of technology and a realm of magic, and the main characters tend to figure things out in various ways. I think you could also posit that Witch World, the High Halleck cycle by Andre Norton, does that a fair bit. When it comes to a character being both a scientist and a magician, I mean, you could even go back to, okay, this is going to be again a little bit nerdy, but hear me out. The Out of the Silent Planets trilogy by C.S. Lewis, with
Mm,
Paralandra Out of the Silent Planet and that hidden strength, where you have this rational scientific person, and then slowly they learn more about the mysticism around them and things like that as they go on. I mean, it is C.S. Lewis, so full disclosure, that means that there will be some religious themes, but it is still a quite serviceable work of science fiction. And I could posit science fantasy as well, because it has not only the science part, but it also has magic in how the different alien worlds, the main character, he goes to Mars, he goes to Venus, he goes to these various planets, and there is a mysticism there. There is a spirituality there. There is a sort of good and evil kind of force. I think for me, I would look at, the Lord Darcy novels by Randall Garrett, where you have magic being treated as a form of science. I think you can go with the Rivers of London series with Ben Aronovich. Uh, yeah, I think I said that pretty good. Okay, I was about to correct myself. I was like, no, actually, I think I said it.
you
Where
said it.
Peter Grant is a police officer and a wizard. So you get that kind of mixture between both of them. I think, if I want to be, again, a little bit selfish, you can look at the character of Icarus in
Yes.
Char and Dash and Son of Abel in my Judge of Mystic series right here. There's the first two books.
Yay!
Love them. And
Yes.
then Icarus is further in Book of Revels and Gun and Gagap. And actually the character of Icarus and their brother Lou is coming up in they are the heroes of the Waxwing series, which we are currently in development of, which is an audio series. So that'll be really fun too. I actually quite think that anytime you see an alchemist, really, you're seeing that combination between science and magic, because that's really what alchemy was when you look at it historically. And you look at these people that we actually have a lot to thank the alchemists for in figuring out how to do chemistry.
Yes. How are we gonna do
So,
chemistry
yeah,
and
I mean,
physics
all I know
together?
about chemistry is that I kept blowing things up, but didn't know you could blow up lactose, but apparently you can. Boom.
So yeah, boom. So, Miss Bernard, before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the five-star restaurants in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about our book, People, Volume 12. Food 101, Volume 12, Italian cuisine. Plus one more. Our books are out, not only one, but 13 volumes, people. Book Food 101 Volume 1 Basics until 13 is only the books that you need. How to create a delicious food. Available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Miss Bernal, let's talk about all your books.
One of my favorite topics. All right. So I am a bestseller when it comes to cyberpunk and when it comes to poetry and myth punk. So these are all kind of subgenres. Cyberpunk is a subgenre of sci-fi. Mythpunk is a subgenre of fantasy. And this was my first large-scale novel. This is Neon Lieben. It is the first book in my cyberpunk series, of which the sequel is coming out this year. Emptiness at the Center is slated for later on this year. And this one is a combination between AI and super soldiers and figuring out whether or not the world's first sapient AI, a female presenting AI named Lieben, is going to help or hinder various groups, and which ideology is going to end up being the one that saves or condemns the world. And then it is interplayed on 70 years later after Lieben has taken control of the planet. What happens when a genetically altered super soldier washes up in Iqaluit, British Columbia, off of the Pacific Ocean end of Vancouver Island? So it gets really passionate. It gets very emotionally grounded and has lots of combat. So
Mhm.
that's
Lots of
my
combat.
oh yeah,
Brutal.
I love combat. So I'm like, yes, emotional scene, fight scene, emotional scene, fight scene, and then some things in the middle to round out some humor. My first publication was actually this guy. And this is Usurper Kings, and that is my
Yes.
social media handle everywhere. Usurper Kings, at Usurper Kings is where you can find me across social media, everything from Twitter to Blue Sky. So I'm around even on Twitch. And this is my poetry collection. And so this one I would say was much more personal in a way. I discuss the feminine through time, from hunter-gatherer all the way to a existential singularity as seen from a transhumanist perspective. So I start off with poems where I'm building off of early mythology, and I'm building off of these sorts of primitive, and I don't say primitive as a negative, just primitive as that's where we started. That was the bedrock, that was the foundation of what we eventually become. All the way through to this idea of basically uploading into a cloud, and what
Hmm.
happens to gender, what happens to the feminine and the masculine when all of a sudden there's no bodies anymore. And so I get really philosophical. I also get really fun. Usurper Kings is very experimental when it comes to certain poems, and very kind of, grounded in history when it comes to others, because I have everything from actual Shakespearean sonnets all the way to kind of word art in there. Now, these two are the ones that I'm currently in love with right now. I love all my works, but this series is, 2 books are out, 2 books are coming this year, and then there's another 2 books coming next year for the Judge of Mystic Saga. The Judge of Mystic Saga is also a place where I'm developing an audio drama, and I have already started developing and releasing tabletop role-playing content. So you can actually play games around your table,
Yes.
casual, chill, one-shot role-playing games that are repeatable, because you can, do a whole bunch of story stuff random, where you can just enjoy and fall in love with these characters, hopefully the same way that I have. And so it starts off with Char and Dash. This is book 1 of the Judge of Mystic Saga, where Judge Caleb Malthison is brought to the stage of a mass magical murder and has to figure out who's doing this, what they're trying to do, before war were declared between formerly warring and tensely truce-bound magic realms, who all converge on planet Earth, aka Midgard, the plane of Midgard, and he is the only one who can potentially stop it. And so what's the first thing he does? Call his girlfriend for help. Ah, his
Help the
girlfriend,
world.
being a 1,000-year-old Slavic badass. So I love Caleb and Tuya teaming up in Charanash, and it has a very explosive finale that brings us into Son of Abel. Now, this
Mm.
was originally published in the Macro Microcosm magazine as a much smaller story than it is now, and it was a story I couldn't let go of. And so I had to edit and add and add, and eventually it became the entirety of the Judge of Mystic saga. And this is what happens. It happens basically right after Charanash. So there's not a whole lot of time between the two books, maybe a couple of days. And everyone's looking for Caleb. What happened to him? Where did he go? And eventually it's Lou, the brother of Icarus, that finds him. And through Son of Abel, we see that sort of valley, that emotional valley that Caleb is going through. We see him battling a different kind of demon. And then at the end of Son of Abel, you see that life is going to start coming up, and there's going to be sunshine once again. And he's going to keep looking for the villains that created the disastrous finale of Chardash. One of which is in Macabre and Monstrous. And this is a
Wow.
horror anthology. And it has myself, and it also has my podcast co-hosts Emily Armstrong and Kes Bischoff. And the three of us, come together as the trio of We Aren't Dead Yet, which is a podcast on TTRPGs, gamer culture, and literature, which you can see on Spotify, Substack, YouTube, anywhere you just search We Aren't Dead Yet. We came across this collection, we came across writing it because Emily is a master when it comes to creating horror worlds. She just is. That's her thing. It's incredible to see her do cosmic horror and body horror. It's amazing. And for me, this was the right place to put in my anti-hero fall story. It's a novelette. So, like a novella, but kind of skirting between novella and novelette. It's about 16,000 words, called Whiskey and Sinner's Blood, where the character of Carolee starts off in the 1990s as just an Irish mum. She's just living through the troubles in Ireland. She is there with her husband and her son. And she's, working part-times at the butcher's just to kind of make ends meet and make sure they have, what they need in life and things like that. And she's disappointed and doesn't necessarily, like where she's at in life. But what are you supposed to do? This is life. This is how it goes. And then her husband comes home with freshly brushed teeth, his hair brushed, and a bottle of whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And she's instantly suspicious.
Something
and,
wrong with it.
and through their conversation, she eventually finds out that, Carolee, my love, I promised our son to the Fae Queen for a set of favors. And the bottom of her life falls out. And the rest of the novelette, Carolee ends up basically descending into this place of desperation and violence in order to rescue her son and just find a better life. And I love one specific part of Whiskey and Sinner's Blood, which is very important for me when I'm crafting a character like Carolee, who does appear in Charanash and in Son of Abel. Like, Carolee is a recurring character. There's moments where she's capable of redemption. There's moments where she's basically handed the right situation. Like, Caleb Matheson appears in Whiskey and Sinner's Blood. He's there and he's like, oh, hey. And she has that moment where she could just open up and
Pop
spill
up.
what happened and talk, and then everything would be okay and it would be figured out. But instead, you have to read Whiskey and Sinner's Blood, but it's incredibly, wonderfully emotive and just an incredibly rich character that I love to just dive into so well. So very proud of that. I'm also very proud of the work of Emily Armstrong and Cass. They both rocked it. This was their first literary publication. Cass Bischoff is a game master for TTRPGs, so tabletop role-playing games, with over 30 years of experience. She's incredible in crafting stories for people to play collaboratively. And then Emily Armstrong is a media producer, and this was her first literary work. They rocked it. It was
They
incredible.
rock it.
Yes,
Definitely.
they
They
rock it.
rock it. And congratulations for all your books, Miss Bernal. So, can you invite our listeners to support all your books?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for supporting Book 101 and Food 101 and everything that Daniel Lucas does. It's so incredible to see the platform just continue to grow and to see everybody that listens in and supports. You can find my books at saphiburnell.com. That is SAPHABURNELL.com. You can also look me up. Basically, my books are available widely. They are distributed all across the world between Saxo and Books a Million and everywhere that you can kind of think of finding a book. Anywhere that Ingram is, so are my books. I'm very glad about that. And then you can also find them on Amazon as well. But for more information on where to find my books, please go to saphiburnell.com. You can also check out my social media handles. I am on X, Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky, all at Usurper Kings. I'm also on Twitch at Usurper Kings. And I just love it if people just supported the arts as you can. If you're in a place where you're like, yeah, well, I'd love to, but that's a lot of books to purchase all at once, please go to your local public library and let them know that you would love to see the works of Safa Burnell in your library collection. And libraries purchase books. It is a fantastic thing. And then as many people as possible can read them. And that is one way that I absolutely say is fantastic. So please, if you can, I would love it for you to own a book of mine. But you can also go to your library and say, hey, I think you should bring in this author. They're really neat.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Safa Bernal because you support her. More cyberpunk books to come.
Mm.
If you want to listen to our previous episode, we had a lot of episodes of this Safa Bernal. We talk about her books, how she crafted it, how she manipulated it, and how Miss Safa Bernal created those interesting and wonderful books. So, Miss Bernal, thank you for your time.
And thank you for yours. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, people. See you soon. I am Daniel Leakey.